Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Second and 60. Well, that was a fascinating conversation that really put this COP26 in perspective from someone that's actually there and what they think is going on. But I wanted to get a different point of view from someone that's in the environmental business, someone that has been an environmentalist for a long period of time, and what they think about what's going on in Glasgow, who's not there. And so I'm joined by Greg Vezina, who's the president of Hydrofuel, which is a company here in Canada that is exploiting ammonia and also is very knowledgeable about hydrogen and other alternative energy. Greg, I just interviewed the president of Climate Solutions organization here in Canada that's over in Glasgow, and he was quite positive about what was going on in COP26. What's your reaction to what's going on in Glasgow?
Brian, sorry to say, but there's just a whole lot of rhetoric and a whole lot of promises and a whole lot of nonsense. The only positive thing, in my opinion, that came out of this was Prime Minister Trudeau actually floated the idea of a global price on carbon, not a price on pollution, and only a price on carbon for anybody that's not a 90% exemption for big users like Canada. See, we don't have a price on pollution and we don't have a price on carbon. And that's really the problem. And so no matter what policy our politicians claim they come up with to deal with pollution and deal with carbon and deal with global warming, at some point, grade 5 math and science becomes involved. And when it costs you 3 times as much to use renewable energy as it costs you to use hydrocarbons, even hydrocarbons that are made from food crops, which are supposedly called green, which are worse than coal, it just doesn't work. So the only excuse for spending more money on domestically produced energy than imports is if the end goal is to remove the 17 countries in the world that control global energy and let everybody produce their own. But to do that, we have to use what we have better instead of thinking that overnight we can replace it all. And that's the problem here. Just the math is very important. So everybody says batteries are the answer. Great. So we're going to come up with a $5,000 battery subsidy. Great. So the research says it costs us $200 a ton for every ton of carbon we reduce with that $5,000 subsidy. Well, the US are talking about the $12,500 US subsidy, which means it's going to be $600 a ton is what we're going to pay to get rid of carbon. But the real world price to get rid of carbon is about 30 a ton. And when Trudeau gave our industry 90% exemptions, they can wait till the carbon tax is 170 a ton before it costs them more money not to pollute. Whereas if we had a $30 a ton carbon tax on everything, then the alternative technologies would be economic today.
So your problem is that the carbon tax isn't applied to everybody. Is that correct?
Not only the carbon tax, but a pollution tax. You see, you can't say that a battery vehicle is zero emission because it's not. And wind is not zero emission either. All energy has life cycle pollution from cradle to grave. And you got to understand the basic math here. This is important. We have 300 years supply of oil reserves, oil and gas. Now, the cost to remove that carbon and use the hydrogen in that oil and gas without polluting is between 30 and 60 a ton, depending on a few variables, not 170, okay? Now, the cost to replace that base load energy with renewables before the economic cost is the production cost. The production is 3 times because to replace base load with renewables, you have to produce it, store it, and regenerate it. because wind and solar aren't available 24/7. So now you need 3 times as much energy. So let's get the basic math. 20% of the energy we use is electricity. 80% of that today is hydrocarbons. 80% of the energy we use is fuels. 100% of that is hydrocarbons. We got to replace that by 3 times. That means we have to increase our generating capacity by 15 times. Now, we can do that. It is technically possible to get to net zero by 2050. All we have to do is build one new nuclear plant, 1,000 megawatts, every day, starting tomorrow for the next 10,000 days, or build 1,500 1 megawatt wind generators every day for the next 10,000 days. Now, Brian, is that going to happen?
No, of course not.
Exactly. So here's what came out of COP 2021. It's going to cost $300 trillion to get off oil. And the wealthy nations are going to give that money to the poor countries because we're all Santa Claus. And we're all going to elect politicians that will do that for us. Well, here's the lesson from this. Germany's electricity costs are 3 times everybody else's because they didn't manage their integration of their renewable energy, okay? Now, with the spike in gas prices, Britain, every wind generator in Britain is backed up by a diesel generator. And their peaking power is gas. So when they're freezing in the dark in Europe this year and their price of energy is 10 times what it used to be, we will find out the real economic impact of the move to renewables. The problem with the renewable is you got to move the whole way. You can't move part way.
Okay. So you're obviously extremely negative on what's going on in Glasgow, but you work for an alternative energy company, for a hydrogen, for an ammonia company. So what's the solution?
The solution is grade 5 math, which is happening around the world. Look, Brian, Microsoft can spend a year's energy costs running their server farms for 2 days on hydrogen fuel cells, but most industries can't. The green technologies that are economic and will be economic are the ones that can compete today without subsidies and incentives. And that's happening. And hydrogen will happen, but only if we use ammonia to get there. And the reason is we have infrastructure that's underutilized. You can increase the supply of hydrogen in pipelines in ammonia rather than natural gas by 50%.
Okay, and so I've talked to a couple of different people from COP26. No one's mentioned ammonia. Lots of people have mentioned hydrogen. Why?
Well, okay, at the last one, the Prime Minister had a picture taken of him with everybody with the ammonia molecule. So again, what the media is reporting and what's happening in the private conversations is 2 different things. If you type ammonia energy into any internet search engine, you'll see there have been 10 $5 billion plants announced this year alone. All ships are going to start running on
ammonia plants.
10 $5 billion green ammonia plants. They're making blue ammonia plants where they're going to capture and sequester the carbon and not emit it. All ships are going to start running on ammonia fuel by 2030. 2024, there's engines and retrofits. Japan is running power plants on 70% ammonia, 30% coal. The whole world, the real world, not our politicians, but business world and science world, you can get to hydrogen by using ammonia.
Okay, so that sounds like, frankly, carbon taxes are a good idea and are going to incentivize business to move to either hydrogen or ammonia, whichever is the most cost-effective route. Or wind or solar, if that makes sense.
Well, okay. What about disposing of the solar panels? What about the pollution from the cadmium from the what about the mining of lithium? So we're only going to focus on the pollution from carbon, and we can kill everything that lives on Earth from the pollution from other things, and that doesn't matter.
So your biggest problem is, while there should be a carbon tax, you're saying there should be a pollution tax.
If we put the real price on pollution in every jurisdiction, then you can't ship your pollution somewhere else.
Well, frankly, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, you think? That's why they don't let me in the room, Brian.
Greg Vezina, president of Hydrofuel. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me, Brian.
We're going to take a final break and come back with some concluding comments in just a minute. Stay with us. Well, thanks for joining us today on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. That was a really interesting series of interviews. And I'm going to have some more from people that are over in Glasgow at COP26. My first guest tonight was Rick Smith, and he is, a guy that's been in the environmental business for 25 years. He's the president of the Canadian Institute for Climate Choices. He previous to that was at the Broadbent Institute. Before that, he was at Environmental Defense. Before that, he was with the New Democratic Party. Before that, he was with International Fund for Animal Welfare. And so from a not-for-profit standpoint, this gentleman knows his stuff. And then we had Greg Vezina, who's president of Hydrofuel. And Greg is an interesting character because he ran for the Green Party. He ran for the Conservatives. He's been very involved in the Liberal Party politics. He's been involved in municipal politics. And he's been, and he's a leader of something called the None of the Above Party right now. So he's been in politics, and he became very disillusioned with politicians, probably because he's also for the last 20, 25 years been very involved in an alternative energy company that's been promoting ammonia. And he knows his stuff. And I think that the two of them have given you two different points of view, both very supportive of the idea of carbon taxes, though Greg really wants taxes on pollution in addition to carbon taxes. And Greg also talks about this full cost accounting that too often we don't take into account, for batteries, for an example, the construction of the batteries and the throwing out of the batteries. In nuclear, he's always harped on the cost of the nuclear waste, which is clearly one of the issues that a lot of people focus on. But when you're just thinking about carbon taxes, that wouldn't have any impact on the cost of nuclear power. And so I think, frankly, Greg's got a point when he's saying that just focusing on carbon taxes isn't necessarily the secret. The idea of pollution taxes might make a lot more sense. That said, I do think that Rick Smith was right, that he was so enthused and encouraged by what was going on in Glasgow at COP26 that he thought that the Prime Minister Trudeau's speech on carbon taxes and the commitment to climate change, against climate change, commitment to reduction of carbon was very strong and one of the most impactful speeches on the topic that he's made, and that he has committed Canada to a very extensive series of carbon taxes and carbon tax price increases. Some people in the media this past week have been talking about this potentially as Prime Minister Trudeau's legacy, or wants it to be his legacy. I do think that one of the things that the benefit of Greg's point of view over just this more narrow point of view of carbon tax is that, frankly, Alberta might be the solution, which means there's a better future for the Alberta oil and gas business than a more narrower view of just the increase of carbon taxes might be. If you just increase carbon taxes, then wind and solar might be a solution, and batteries might be a solution, and nuclear might be a solution. But if you've got this pollution tax or you've got the full life cycle, full cost accounting that Greg talks about, then you got to look for the cost of producing what you're using, and the cost of production of batteries and of solar and of wind is extensive. Of nuclear is huge, and then of the waste and the throwing out of the batteries, the dealing with the nuclear waste is obviously an issue, and the downtime for solar and wind is clearly an issue, particularly when, as Greg points out, you got to produce it, store it, and then have a backup. And so he's saying you got to have 2 to 3 times the generating capacity that you would if you were just producing something that was base load all the time. And the reason why Greg's solution makes sense for the Alberta oil and gas business is his argument of I guess it's called blue ammonia or blue hydrogen, can be made right at source, where you extract the hydrocarbons from the oil sands, from wherever you're extracting it from, convert it to either hydrogen or ammonia. He would argue ammonia, but lots of other people have been talking about hydrogen. Ship it without any carbon in it to wherever you're going to do something with it, and burn it in an internal combustion engine, or convert it to electricity, or store it, or all of the above. The big benefit as well, when you're shipping the hydrogen or the ammonia, you don't necessarily have the same pollution problems that you would with shipping bitumen or another hydrocarbon, because you don't have carbon. It often is, I think both hydrogen and ammonia are lighter than air, so it dissipates. You don't have spills, you don't have leaks, you don't have pollution into rivers or land or oceans, etc. And then also being able to sequester the carbon is far easier when you do it at source. And so therefore you can remove the carbon from the hydrocarbon, keep the hydrogen, which is in the hydrocarbon, or the ammonia, which is, and I don't know the chemistry, but I think it's like NH3 versus NH. So it's a pretty similar kind of chemical compound versus the hydrocarbon, which has got obviously hydrogen, which is sort of like ammonia, one step away, and carbon, and you leave the carbon behind. And it's easier to do that at source and put the carbon back either into that oil well, or Greg's explained to me ways that you turn it into carbon flakes that can be used as fertilizer, or there's lots of other ways that you can do it. And I think that lots of people are talking about hydrogen plants and facilities in Alberta and the oil sands right now. I was surprised that Greg told us about all these ammonia plants that are being constructed around the world. And one of the big benefits of ammonia is that you've got a distribution system and storage system, because ammonia is currently being produced, distributed, and stored because farmers use it for fertilizer. And so there's these white ammonia tanks at a whole bunch of different farms all around the world, and farm implements, and you've got storage at major ports, and you got ammonia tank cars for railways, etc. So that might be one of the benefits. And also I think it's cheaper and more easy to ship ammonia than hydrogen, because you don't need to super chill it or keep it under pressure. Anyway, I'm not the expert on this, but I think Greg's got a point. Carbon taxes are probably good, but may not be the full solution. Maybe what we need is full cost accounting or pollution taxes. Anyway, bottom line, I think actually what's happening in Glasgow is positive. I think that the Prime Minister's speech was excellent. I think that it's going to maybe not cause every nation in the world to agree to a reduction of carbon to the extent that he was suggesting, or an increase in carbon taxes to the extent that he was suggesting. But if we can get lots of countries to agree to some sort of carbon tax, I think that's a great start. And clearly having as many countries in Glasgow, Russia and China weren't there, which is a problem, but as many countries in Glasgow, particularly the United States and new President Biden apologizing for what the Republican Party and the Republican government had done, past government of the United States had done in exiting the commitment to the Paris Accords, and every other country supporting it, has got to be positive. And I do think that this is the existential crisis of our generation. We are going to be defined by how we dealt with COVID-19, but also, more importantly, longer term, how we deal with climate change. And the idea that Canada is warming at twice the rate of the average for the rest of the world, and our north is warming even more than that, and that's obviously causing a problem with permafrost and icebergs and water levels. It's a little scary. And so I think that we've got some encouraging news this past week, and I think that people like Greg are coming up with even better solutions. And I think that one of the benefits of carbon taxes, and I wish we also had these pollution taxes, are that we're all going to have innovation and technology and create new other solutions. And that's going to be wonderful for business, for people who want to invest in innovative companies, and long-term for all of us and the world. Thanks for joining us. Good night, everybody.